Shade, Fetu, Sadluhu, this is um the long requested video going over the ceremony at Fouha Rock. And so this will go into a little bit of the history, some of the aspects of it. But I hope it is informative or helpful as you are designing this part of the Chamoru Minecraft game. And so the Lukao Fuha, the ceremony at Fouha, this is the earliest documentation of that ceremony. It references that the Chamorro people go to believe that they were born from a rock. This is prior to Spanish colonization. This is after Magellan, but before San Vitores. And then the rock there, a woman gave birth to the land of the sea, to all that is visible. And so this is the earliest mention. There are others that come after this, but it is believed that most likely this rock that they refer to, which then is reinforced that over later accounts, that this is one of the largest gatherings in Guam, that it takes place at Fouha. And you are familiar with the story, and the story is key. It's key in this revived, sort of reinvented sort of ceremony. And so I'll give you the PowerPoint too, which has the basics here. But let me just go over the specifics of the ceremony itself. And so it is believed that Chamorros gathered there for hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years, that it was a time in which they recalled their origins, revered and remembered their ancestors. People came from different villages, perhaps from other islands. And so in 2014, a group called Our Islands Are Sacred, which had formed primarily to protest U.S. military buildups and increases in Guam and the Marianas, they led a return to Fouha. The word that they used is Lukao Fuha. Lukao is a term is an Austronesian term that the Spanish then began to use, and then in the church, the Catholic Church, and then it came to mean a procession. But a lukao could be a pilgrimage, a trip, traveling somewhere. And so they called it Lukao Fuha because it was a return to Fouha. That Chamorros had not gathered in this place for centuries because of colonization, changes in identity, and so on. And so this was a return. And so this is a flyer that was created to support that event. And then as you can see, people walked from Humåtak, the village, or from the trailhead, which is where we walked from, and then they traveled into Fouha and then gathered there for a ceremony. And so this year is 10 years since that first ceremony. And so Independent Guahan, another group that I'm a part of, has kind of taken over having an annual sort of open public ceremony to keep this going. Other groups and individuals also do their own ceremonies related to this. And so the exact nature of the ceremony changes for the groups, but there's some consistent themes, there's some consistent ideas involved. And so in this presentation, I'll go over some of those. So number one is that as part of this pilgrimage, there is the pontan, the young coconut. So that when people walk into this area, they take a young coconut in the way in which the young coconut represents the settling of a new land, right? That voyagers across the Pacific would take coconuts with them, and that when they would arrive in a new place, planting the coconut in the ground was one of the ways to indicate that you had settled it, that this was potentially a new home for you. And so traditionally, every lukao has at least one or several pontan, the young coconut that is already sprouting, and that this is carried and then it is taken to the ceremony area near Fouha Rock. The blowing of the kulu is something that is definitely done throughout the ceremony. So as people gather, the kulu is blown. When the ceremony starts, the kulu is blown. in between different parts of the ceremony, the kulu is blown, and then at the end, the kulu is blown. And so it need not be one person, it can be several people, many people. And some of the most touching ceremonies have been when you have lots of people with their own individual shells kind of blowing them in some type of melody and some type of harmony. But the kulu is an important part of this. There should be an opening blessing. This blessing is something which is done to recognize those who have come together. It's expensive. It sets the tone. It sets the intentions for the event. And the blessing ceremony is something that different people will do. It's different groups will have different blessings to open. So Feta, you may remember the sign on mommy, which is the most common one today. Some groups will do that. Other groups, like Inetnam Gefpagu, will do signa ginin hogu esti siha. Similar to that, other groups will have their own. Man, there's a new group, Gimatan Guma, that does their own Manetnun hit. And so this can change, but ultimately there is some type of blessing which is not tied specifically to Fa'una and Puntan and their story, but it is about just setting the intentions and gathering people. Sometimes this blessing is done at the beginning of the Lukao away. Sometimes it is done at Fouha Rock itself. These are two examples over the years of one when the opening blessing was done in the village of Humåtak itself. This is one where the first initial blessing was done on the trailhead when we were still walking in. This is another key thing, is offerings, that you take something with you, and you take something with you that you offer to the ancestors. Expensive items which are common for this are, of course, fruits and vegetables, especially if it's something that you have grown yourself. Jewelry is important. Also rice. Rice is one of the most important things because rice had very high ceremonial value prior to and in the middle of Spanish colonization. And so you would bring, this is where, as we've talked about, the ketupat of rice comes in. And so sometimes people will bring a basket of rice, the woven diamond of rice, but you have to bring an offering. And so some people will leave their offerings there, other people will take them with them. And this act of bringing an offering is important because as you go through this ceremony, you are connecting to your ancestors. And so Chamorros believed heavily, of course, in ancestral veneration, the idea that you respect your ancestors, you pay homage to them, and then they in exchange will keep you, the living descendants, alive and safe. They'll make it rain when you need rain for your plants. They'll make the fish move swiftly towards your nets. They'll make your sling stones hit their targets. And so because of this, people bring offerings to show their love and their appreciation of their ancestors, but they also bring offerings to receive blessings. So this is something that has become much more common, is for people that wear shell jewels, carved jewelry, that shell jewelry, carved jewelry, that they'll bring it, they'll place it with the other offerings for the ceremony, and then afterwards they'll take it and then they'll offer, and then part of it is that the ancestors were called to bless, and so when it's over, you take it back and it has received the blessing of your ancestors. And so you can see here different things. This is the guasali, which is a native, beautiful native flower. This is the ilang ilang over here. Different types of things. Even putitainobu. So some of these are, some of these are plants that have been here for a while. Some of them are more recent ones, coconut shells. But ultimately, something that is meaningful to you and represents a connection that you have or that you want to have to your ancestors. And so this is something which not everybody does, and not everyone does it in the same way. But it was very important as part of these gatherings prior to colonization that you would recount your genealogy, that you would talk about who you descended from, who are your ancestors. And oh, it's my thing. Oh, hey, that you would who are your ancestors? Can you name them? Can you talk about them? Now, of course, this in ancient times, this took hours and hours for people to go back and create and tell stories of their great ancestors. For for this type of sort of revived ceremony, people will do different things. So sometimes what we've done is that people will approach the offerings and they will speak the name of one ancestor, several ancestors, or sometimes people will step forward and they will whisper. They don't have to say it out loud because the ancestors can hear them, whether they're whispering or whether they're shouting. And so people have their own approach to how this is carried out. But the most important thing, though, is that you're calling on the ancestors. You're calling on to them. And so there is this part in which you remember who you are descended from, and that you by through this you kind of bring them to life in the ceremony, in the place. And this is an important part of the Lukao Fuha then, is the retelling of the story of our first ancestors. And so over the years, often it's come when we do this ceremony, it's fallen on me and then my kids to tell the story of Fauna and Puntan. And we tell the story in Chamorro. Usually what happens is I say it in Chamorro and then Sumaya and Akli'i will translate it for me. But this is a key part of this ceremony, is that Fauna and Puntan are not necessarily like gods in another universe, but that this ceremony is all about thinking of Fauna and Puntan as like the first ancestors of the people, the first ancestors of the people. And so you remember the story as the origin of the Chamorro people, that these are our first ancestors. And so this portion, though, can take the place in storytelling. It can take the place in chant or dance. I've been to some versions of this where people, perform a chant for Fauna and Punten, any number of things. But as long as this story, because everyone is telling their own genealogy and the genealogies overlap, are woven together in some ways, but everyone is united by the Fauna and Punten story. That's sort of the intent. And then there is some chant. There is some chant which brings everyone together, unifies everybody. And so sometimes it's a chant that everyone knows. There have been lukaus where people send out the lyrics on text so everyone can look at it on their phones, bring sheets of paper. Sometimes there's a chant group or a dance group that will perform it for everybody. But ultimately, after the genealogy is done, the story of the first ancestors is done, then there must be some chant to help close sort of the ceremony. And for the end of this, it is common then for people to approach Fouha Rock. And then people, as Fouha is meant to represent Fauna, the rock then represents sort of, it's like visiting your grandma. It's like visiting your great grandmother, paying your respects to her. And so people will sometimes bring their offerings over to the rock. It's common too for people sometimes to either kind of put their head on Fouha Rock or put their nose on Fouha Rock, in the same way that we Fanini to put their nose on the rock. But this is something that people do in different ways. Sometimes people will walk around the rock, observe the ocean. Sometimes people will go over there and just pray or chant, just hang out. But it is common after the ceremony to just go and then spend, whether a few minutes, whether an hour, beside sort of the rock, which kind of marks this as the creation point. All right. So I hope that was helpful. The video that I've shared with you in the past of Nihi, when Nihi followed independent Guahan 1 year on the Lukao Fuha, is very important. It kind of gives an overview and it has some video of the event. But again, I hope, I just hope that this was informative as you're creating the Chamorro Minecraft game. C'est juste